Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Old Street Labs podcast. My name is Rob Woodhead, and I am your host. I first want to start with a thank you. Thank you for all the feedback you gave on episode 1, which was with Ben Birch. Really happy to hear it went down so well. On this episode today, we get to have a fantastic conversation with Evan Larbi. Evan is a brand strategist, and like me, he's had a bit of a meandering career, taking many different tangents. So we got to speak about various parts of that, from his early days as an urban planner, working with music digital startups, building product with Ostmodern, working with futurists. Now, I didn't know what that was, so that was a pretty interesting part to learn about. Up until today, when he's helping brands build out their strategies. And one of the most interesting parts of me was his idea around maintaining the joy in that and keeping humans at the center of it, as you kind of take brands and build out the strategy to kind of take them to the world and tell their story. So I won't tell you too much more. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Once again, if you have any feedback or indeed you have any kind of topics you want me to cover with different people as I make these podcasts, because they are for you in the end, then please let me know. But that is all from me. I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, catch you soon. Welcome to the Old Street Labs podcast. The human stories behind the tech. From concept to code. Real startup journeys. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Good to have you with us today. I'm excited for this conversation because today we have an old friend of mine, Evan Larbi. Evan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rob. It's great to be here.
Good stuff. You and I go way back. We're old friends from a long time ago, and I wanted to start the conversation because we have, similar-ish backgrounds in that we both started as non-technical people and have moved into the tech kind of ecosystem. And so I wanted to kind of start to frame the initial part of the conversation around your early career and how you transition from what you've been doing into what you're doing now. So it'd be great to start there and kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, completely. That'd be great. So there are a few tangents in this, and I think that a lot of my career has been quite tangential. But I guess that looking back, there is sort of some method in what seems to be total chaos. But so I studied classics at university, and after that I did a bunch of different things, including teaching, volunteering, etc., etc. And I guess sort of whilst traveling, I just became really interested in. Well, I came to the realization that I just really like buildings and physical buildings and the impacts they had on people's lives and how they're created and so on. But it had never really kind of crossed my mind to become an architect. And at that time, sort of being 23, I didn't think it was time to sort of spend the next 7 years trying to become an architect. Nor would I be able to. But anyway, that's another story. So I did a degree that was called City Design and Social Science. And it was a mixture of basically like half architects and or landscape designers and half sort of social scientists or people from like entirely different backgrounds, and I was one of those people, and what the course was trying to do was to try and find sort of the bridge between physical design and social design. So it was, I don't know, it was a great grounding in just simply kind of trying to turn a concept or an idea into an actual thing, into an actual design. So it was a really nice kind of introduction, or kind of, I guess, grounding in how design works. And after that, I ended up going to work as at an architect's practice, as basically kind of, as I would describe it, to a friend of mine, someone who would sit in the corner and like do stuff that wasn't actually the architecture. So it's kind of a bit of lots of different things. And then
Was that kind of classed as like a learning process? And because I remember going, I mean, I worked in finance, and you were definitely, when you first started, you weren't given the proper jobs. You were given the kind of peripheral stuff because it was supposed to part of the training. Was that how it was kind of sold to you initially?
yeah, I mean, I think it was I guess a series of coincidences, and whilst I was, or maybe it was just before I did that masters, I did an internship with an architect, and she then uh, a few years later sort of shut down her practice and became a partner somewhere else, and we got on really well. And she said, "Well, I've become a partner here. Come and work here." And and I think the question of what exactly I was going to be doing was slightly sort of up in the air. But because I had this degree in urban design, it was vaguely applicable, I guess. But it was, yeah, a mix of different things, including like a bit of business development, bit of project management, bit of writing stuff, and figuring things out. But whilst I was there, I qualified as an urban planner, and I was an urban planner there for quite a long time. And around sort of 2007, 8, I just became, again, like the next tangent, really interested in tech and how um, tech was being used to mediate cities. So
Okay.
obviously, the first iPhone had come out. There was just so much optimism about like digital tech and where it would go. And I think specifically to do with cities, and I think kind of urban design, urban planning was really kind of welcoming, and really kind of at least certain aspects of it were really kind of engaged by what digital tech could do for like kind of community building, for getting people together, etc. And so that really, yeah, really drew me in.
Interesting. What kind of things can you give me some like a couple of examples of the kind of tech that you were talking about in that community sense?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, sort of looking back, it was just things like kind of how do you uh, bring people together on a for a shared purpose. So there were lots of kind of artistic interventions that would use like bits of technology and so on. So that could be like a sculpture, um, or something that was put into kind of canvas views, or to create sort of little interactions. And before, sort of like 20 years ago, you might have had like a library in a community square, or like a public square, a public space, and now people are putting kind of whether it's screens, like
Right.
things that were more digitally driven, and I thought that was really fascinating for what you could do in terms of bringing people together and just getting people to share ideas, and also things like transport and so on becoming much more digitally driven. Um, Whereas, yeah, before it's just so analog.
Yeah. I mean, we've come a long way since then, right? With it, like everything's now done through your phone and traveling and absolutely, that's come a huge amount of distance from where you started then.
Yeah, that's right. And sort of kind of being at the beginning of all of that, and seeing how that world was coming together, there was just so much kind of energy and buzz, and like there were just quite a few projects as well, kind of just around the world, which were looking at like how do you how kind of do you engage with the city better, how do you kind of move around the city better, how do you enjoy spaces better, and so yeah, that's, and the world has changed quite a lot kind of as a result of that technology.
Amazing. So that was yeah, we've got your first taste of product and digital stuff, and this is like whetting your appetite for doing more. What was the next step? Where did you go next?
Yeah, so I mean, I started, I guess, like going to various meetups that were to do with like digital and tech, and there were uh, just lots of projects happening, kind of like from the ground up, that kind of I just became quite interested in, and so on. And I did some work for a futurist, which was uh, a little bit bonkers in some ways.
Can you explain what a futurist is?
Yeah, so I mean this could be a whole nother podcast,
Nostradamus
I guess.
type.
Um, but but it's futures research and like narratives. They're really about sort of trying to understand or create scenarios about the future, or trying to understand where things might go. So it's not
Right.
about being predictive, but about trying to tell stories that could be plausible about what might be happening 10, 20, 30 years into the future and so on. And there's a whole sort of canon, and there's a really kind of rigorous approach to future research and future narrative that has been like in place for quite a long time. So, and it's an entirely legitimate thing, and lots of organisations sort of go to futurists of various guises to try and understand sort of the impacts of um, political things, sort of technological things, etc., etc. And it's really sort of to try to kind of navigate sort of as a business or as an organisation or non-profit, whatever, how certain things might come to play or come to pass out. But it's not predicting. It's sort of trying to understand and analyze things.
Amazing. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of that going on within the realms of AI at the moment, and where that's going to take us and how that's going to go. But perhaps we'll leave that for later in the conversation when we talk about the
Yeah,
future.
sure,
But that
sure.
is, lots of businesses, they think short term, right? They're thinking, okay, how do I get through the next quarter or get through the next, short term perspective? Whereas that's like, okay, 10, 15, 20, even further into the future, I imagine, thinking about what's where should you place yourself in order to kind of benefit from the changes in kind of like more macro and kind of tailwinds or
Yeah, that's
headwinds.
right. And I think there are lots of ways to look at it and to approach it, and then there are certain schools of thoughts about sort of the origins of it, but one is sort of post Second World War and trying to understand sort of how to rebuild societies and so on. And people weren't necessarily thinking about like what's the next big technology that's going to come about. It's more about like, well, actually, if this happens, what that does that then mean for this society, or how do we sort of make certain kind of social systems more kind of flexible, more robust, and so on. Yeah, so you tend to find kind of quite a lot of big institutions doing it and so on. I think Shell very famously kind of has or used to have like a futurist department or a
Right.
scenario planning department, etc.
I imagine that comes into your. I mean, it definitely touches on your day job now, right? And how you kind of talk to people about the future of their brands. But we're going to come on to that.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
nearly there.
sure,
What
sure.
you whetted your appetite with technology. You're working
Yeah,
for the futurist.
yeah, that's right. So I did that for a fair bit of time, sort of on the side as kind of being an urban planner, and I freelanced again, sort of on the side, working for little small startups and giving them advice and helping them out, and some business development and so on. And I also did a kind of a couple of coding courses just to try and understand, how coding worked and how engineering worked. Not to become a coder in the end or anything, but just to understand sort of a little bit about that world. And I eventually went to work for a music tech company as a project manager. And at the time, it was like this just very buzzy startup, and it had lots of interest from like the music community, like the investment community, as well as like tech. And so it was, it felt like a great place to be, sort of, a great place to join. And it was a really sort of interesting experience as from like a startup point of view, and from like kind of a brand point of view. And yeah, and it was exactly as you would imagine a startup to be, like just lots of things happening in lots of different directions, and people kind of working in in different directions, wearing different hats, etc.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I dabbled in the music industry myself, and it's a
Mm.
fascinating place, and it was going through so much flux and has been going through for almost 20 years in terms of the disruption it's caused by digitalization has just been enormous, and now with AI coming in, so I can't imagine working in a startup within as that all stuff was kind of going on initially. So must have been chaos is probably a light word for it.
Yeah, and also it was music hardware as well, which is sort of
Okay,
like
So just to make it much harder.
Yeah, that's right. So much harder, kind of greater risk and more challenging. And I was there for sort of a little under a year, which in startup terms felt much longer than that. And from there, kind of went to work at a digital product agency called Ostmodern, and the founders of Ost had started the company in 2004. This was sort of again like another great moment, but for it was when sort of the big broadcasters were putting their content online, so
Right.
BBC, ITV, and so on, and they designed sort of a lot of the early kind of UIs for kind of for different broadcasters and different media companies. I think there's the history of kind of iPlayer is a little bit is a little bit contested. They weren't sort of directly involved in designing that from what I understand, but I think they they worked on Channel 4, they worked on ITV, they did work on BBC at various points, and so it was kind of film and digital, or like kind of was very much kind of or video and digital was very much in the DNA of the company, and it had kind of like grown very kind of massively, very quickly over sort of a certain amount of time, and I joined there when they were sort of at a certain inflection point.
Still doing project management type role.
Yeah, that's right. So I joined as a project manager, and uh, uh, yeah, I mean the founders of Roster were great, and they were kind of just quite open to sort of lots of different types of people uh, joining the company, and I didn't realize how complicated it was to get like basically a film onto a digital platform or a phone or something. And it was a great education in trying to and learning about sort of how that process works, and how do you create kind of the right kind of systems and experiences for people.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I get, yeah, that's quite a learning curve then at that place of learning how those kind of things work. I guess also managing developers, because that is quite a skill to acquire. I got to say, I having done it for a few years now, and the different personalities you get within a business like that, right? So, kind of being a project manager, you've got to be able to, manage across a different types of personality type.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, not kind of being a project manager anymore, and kind of having a been at the coalface of it. I'm a bit like an ex-smoker about project managers. Um, but at the same time, I recognise just how difficult it is, because you're managing up, you're managing kind of down, as it were, and across, and lots of different disciplines, and so on things that are not everyone understands, and sometimes they're kind of very technical, and sometimes less so. And what we're trying to do is like get people to kind of move towards a common goal. But yeah, um, it was yeah basically being thrown into the fire or whatever, and trying to kind of get to grips with kind of all the different parts of like how you put together a kind of like a platform. And the thing about Ost was that sort of it was the founders were all kind of designers, and none of them had come from like pure digital design, because I think when they were studying it, it wasn't necessarily so much of a thing, but I think there were a couple of product industrial designers, like one had come from fashion design, and so I think what they were trying to do was like have a very serious capital S or rigorous capital R approach to digital at a time when they started, it was all kind of a bit wacky and a bit sort of
Right.
a bit cartoon like. And so kind of that seriousness with design sort of was a real thread that kind of that ran through the company, and it had grown from just being kind of designers to being the whole gamut, from like designers, researchers to developers and support people and QA, etc.
So yeah, building a big boat to do everything. That's quite interesting. because you know, especially in the UK now, that's quite a difficult thing to do with the cost of all those things and finding projects which are big enough to be able to manage that. But I guess if you're doing things for the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, so on, the budgets are big enough to cope with that.
Yeah, and I think kind of, and it's quite telling that that company is actually um, yeah, gone to the wall now.
Right.
Doesn't exist anymore. And I think part of that is to do with how kind of the agency world has changed so much, and just what you need to do in order to sort of the costs and the kind of the profit model of like being an agency based in London building these kinds of products for certain people. I think. I mean, like if you probably talk to them, they'd be probably have 1,001 reasons why it just didn't work out. But it is, it's just a really, really hard business running an agency. That's I'm sure you
Yeah.
know.
So that was, I think, about what, just before the pandemic. You then decided to take the leap, become, build your own business, and I guess you were freelance at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And so, and when I sort of left, and they were shrinking a bit at the time, and when I left, I guess it could have been like just go and find um, another job. And I should say that kind of like for a couple of years before that, or like a few years before that, I'd stopped being a project manager and I was like strategy director there, and I just essentially was working on positioning the business or working quite closely with the founders, and a lot of it was sort of like the kinds of things that you find when you are building a brand for any company. So it's like who are we, what do we stand for, etc., and like what's our voice. And one of the things that I was working on sort of for a number of years before I left was like what does a company sound like, and what kind of what are the words that we put out there, sort of thing. So and trying to bring sort of as much rigor and seriousness, capital S, to kind of the words and the language side of things as there had been in design. And so it's sort of it dovetailed quite nicely with what I've gone on to do since. But yeah, a lot of it is like thinking about um, strategy, products, language, and so on.
Is that, I guess, you go, you're in a project management role, and they've kind of seen your talent and qualities and said, right, we'd like you to kind of push more into the strategy piece. Was there a bit of self-learning you had to go through in order to kind of understand? Because I think some of it is common sense, like any job. There's a lot of common sense which goes with it, and you can apply that to it. But some of it's, and I've, I think you, as an entrepreneur, you have to wear many hats with what you do, and some things you kind of naturally lean into, and other things you have to kind of think, well, how do I go about doing that? And nowadays we've got the likes of ChatGPT to ask and help us along the way. But back then, I guess, did you go and seek advice about how to do it, or was it something that you naturally kind of felt comfortable doing and got involved with?
Yeah, I think it was in certain ways there was sort of a natural end to being a project manager, and I was kind of um, perhaps I don't know, to a certain extent, like when I got to Ost, I was sort of coming to the end of like thinking like project manager or being a project managery sort of person, and I was just so much more interested in the strategy side of things, and um, and nearly on every project that I worked on, not all of them, but like I would end up sort of thinking in that way, or sort of getting involved in that aspect of things, and so um, there wasn't kind of really any point at which um, anyone said, well, like, do you, okay, you're this now, and I sort of like
Yeah.
crowbarred my way into it. I just this is what I'm going to do now, and I think they for one reason or other, very kindly said, okay, yeah, I think that's what you're doing, and yeah, you're not that anymore. So um, yeah, for me, that's how it happened, and there are lots of lots of ways of kind of becoming a strategy person, and it's quite telling that when you talk to sort of different strategists, they all kind of often have sort of these tangents that they've sort of
Mm.
gone on, and they've arrived at strategy in very different ways, and so everyone has their own sort of unique story, full stop. But like everyone has their own unique story for how they get into strategy.
Yeah, and not having had a linear career myself, it's kind of I draw on things from my different pieces, the puzzle that has made up my career in my day job now. So I'm sure that strategists, they can lean into different parts of what they've done before to say, well, actually, that's quite useful. And your urban planning, your futurist kind of endeavors, your project management, all of those things will help you with kind of the thinking around strategy, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think, and I sort of, I guess the last piece of that is sort of the words
Mm.
and writing, and like I sort of bill myself as like a strategist slash writer, and I sort of feel as though you can't really be, and maybe this is deeply unfair and not entirely correct, because there are lots of ways of being a strategist, but like I feel as though in order to be sort of like um, uh, a strategist, you kind of have to understand words. You have to sort of have to get the connection and the tones and like between words, like kind of you have to understand between the difference between voice and tone, and all those kinds of different things. And I think that's a key point in working as a strategist, because in order to kind of deliver like meaningful strategy to people, you have to understand language. And I think because language is at the very core of like strategy, at least digital
Interesting. So,
strategy.
so do you then like draw back all the way back to your classics degree in some respects for that kind of piece?
Yeah, and in certain ways. I mean, maybe not sort of directly in terms of the actual.
You're not quoting Latin
It.
in your
No,
strategy.
that's long forgotten. But um, I think I'm thinking, and maybe it's kind of unconscious in terms of like what I'm drawing, but I feel as though I'm most often kind of drawing on language and expression in what I do, and that's kind of the vein of strategy I work in. So it is kind of going kind of very far back and looking at how we kind of express an idea or how we express a concept, and like what a message actually means.
So that brings us up to Studio Junction, what you're doing now. You're using all of these skills that you're putting to help in like other businesses kind of deliver, like bring out that brand, bring out that product strategy as best you can. What kind of businesses are you working with at the moment? Who are you seeing as people that are useful to it for your skill set and the skills and the services you bring?
Yeah, and so they're almost exclusively digital, but not entirely. But like I mean that's that's a bit of a trite comment in a way, in that so far as every business has to be digital today. But what I mean by that is like almost exclusively tech or tech driven.
Right.
And like when I started, I had like obviously I had no idea what I was doing, like and in terms of like which clients to work with, and it's been a whole range of clients, from like education to like deep tech, to fintech and fashion, and and third sector. But what is just telling is the fact that um, they often just all have the same problems. They might be kind of very very different in their approaches, or might have very different outcomes, but the issue of like who are we and what do we stand for, and how do we articulate our offer to our audience, is something that most of them are struggling with, and that complexity of like untangling that is basically what I do. Um, yeah.
Interesting. And so you started in about 2019. How has it evolved through that time? I mean, it's it's a bit like us. You start in the beginning of the pandemic, not the greatest time to start a business, but it must have given you well, it gave us certainly the ability to kind of reach a lot of people in a short amount of time because everyone's sat at their desk like answering emails. Um, how did you have you seen it evolve through that time and up to now?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and also kind of like what's happened as a result of the pandemic as
Right.
well,
Yeah.
um, and it's so when I started, I didn't, I was trying to figure out what it was. I was just like, well, it's this and it's this, it's this and this. And I think I remember having a conversation with somebody who'd set up their own thing, and they actually said to me, well, you've got to figure out like what it is you actually want to focus on. Like just do one thing, or one thing that kind of sits within this, or a few things that sit within the same sphere, and do those
Yeah.
things well. And and when I started, it was it was very often like helping people figure out their product strategy, and then kind of the business that wraps around that, and then how you communicate that to the outside world. And and now it's sort of it's almost kind of outside in, but driven by like what's at the core of what the business does. So, and what I mean by that is that it's very often kind of it's brand strategy and figuring out kind of like what the brand is and what it stands for, and um but that's kind of really driven by like the core of the company. And so in terms of the process, all I really do is like I ask people a bunch of questions, and I have conversations with them. So yeah, it's a little bit disconcerting having this conversation because it's off. I'm off the one
You're the
who's off. Yeah,
it's the shoe is on the other foot, Evan, for
yeah,
once.
exactly. So it's and that's what it is. Like trying to sort of get to the the core of a of a company and what it stands for. And the way I describe it is like it's actually about kind of trying to find narrative systems, and that might be sort of like a slightly grandiose way of expressing it, but it's like finding kind of the language that represents what it is that you offer, and that language and that those words can sit on like a website, they can sit in a product, they can sit on like social media, but those things have to be consistent. And what I'm trying to do is like trying to find the systems that will kind of will ripple out and work from that core. um
Must be fascinating because you're going into the heart of businesses, right? And they often have a projection of themselves through their brand and everything else, but it's not necessarily what they're doing deep down inside. And you're seeing not only the business from the inside, but you're seeing the relationships between the top people at the top, and probably beyond that as well. And that must be fascinating. And you must go into situations which, I mean, they no two businesses are the same because of that, I assume.
yeah, and that's right. And I think a lot of it is because I've worked with founders quite a lot. It's either founders or senior leadership, and at that point it's sort of it's often kind of beyond the day to day, and obviously there are fires to fight and so on, but it's thinking about kind of things that's a bit beyond the day to day, and so it can very quickly um you know start going into like kind of actually what's the emotional kind of resonance here, what are the emotional issues here, and you very kind of very often you're having sort of quite sort of intense conversations with people running companies about stuff they find very difficult, and don't necessarily talk about very often with the people who work for them, or and sometimes with their co-founder. It can be a little bit tricky. I sometimes sort of describe it as being like an external co-founder, where you're sort of there in the trenches with them. You're helping them figure out some tough things, but you can be like just brutally honest because
Yeah.
there's like there's skin in the game, but there's no skin in the game, and at the end of it all, somebody, the person who hires you can tell you to go away, and
Right.
um and I think kind of the benefit is like somebody from the outside who wants you to succeed, who is there just saying, can you stop doing that, stop being an idiot, get over, focus on the right things, and like, or your messaging is like just makes no sense, or there's so much complexity there that actually what you need to focus on is this thing.
Do you find yourself having to be that? I mean, obviously not in those words, I'm sure, but like having to be that brutal with people to be like, no, hang on a sec, you're doing the wrong thing because, and I equate it to what we do, which is we're trying to help people build a product, and that people come to us with big ideas and about what they're doing. I'm often like, let's not try and boil the ocean. Let's not try and do that. Let's focus on this one piece. Stop trying to do that. But you have to couch it in language which is, understandable, but also acceptable by from a service provider to someone paying the bills. But I guess you get closer to them than we do. You're really entrenched with someone because you're talking to them about the absolute core of their business, the strategy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I mean, there are lots of similarities between what you guys do and what I do, and I think that you kind of have to go to a point where you're really trying to understand like what it is they want to achieve and what it
Yeah.
is they want to deliver. And I think if you're doing that, you get to some places which are tricky. Um, but yeah, and it happens a lot that you end up having these conversations with people that are very gloves off, and it's, I mean, I've never called anyone an idiot, but and nobody
You're not that. I know you well. You would never say that.
um but I think sort of there's just no point in being dishonest with a
Yeah.
client if you think that what they're doing just isn't going to work. Because I mean, not just because it's going to reflect bad when in the future if you think it's going to cause problems, but also it's just like, what are you doing? It's the point
Mm.
um, of being
And also,
professional.
you want them to keep working, right? You want them to be a successful business that you continue to work with. So, it's in your interest to make them as good as they possibly can be.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember sort of years ago, and like completely unrelated, working with someone who was saying that they thought you just always need to tell the client what they need to hear. And I just remember sort of, even though that was quite early on in my career, and I was like, that just doesn't seem right to me. And that's, I don't know, that's something that's kind of stuck with me. It's like, oh, actually, let's be honest here. Let's be honest here.
I think there are certain clients who would like to hear what they want to hear, but it's not going to do them good in the long run. So, yeah, I agree with that. Um, how has things changed? Are you seeing, with the likes of AI and people using ChatGPT and so on, are you seeing people get to a place with their brand strategy which is further on than they might normally have got because they can use these things? Or are they going down roads which are, they're kind of getting a bit confused about things because, using these things, they give you a, fairly average standard answer unless you're using them really well. And so you can end up kind of maybe going down the wrong path a little bit.
Yeah, I think I don't know, it's the big discussion at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyone who's, a creative or, works with words and is not just looking over their shoulder, is like looking right next to them, seeing how the impact of those two letters of the alphabet, A and I, and is concerned about like um what that means, not just well for themselves, but also like what that means for the world of work. And in terms of what I'm seeing, it's there are some people who think, well, actually, we don't need we don't need any creatives anymore. We don't need any more copywriters anymore because we could just we'll stick it in a chatbot. Um, um, and looking at it, sort of the results are often just sort of from what I've seen, just kind of often end up in like this uncanny middle, or this, it's either kind of a bland middle or it's not. Um, it's just not great. But there are some, you can get some good responses, and I've seen certain clients who've had who've worked with things and have had some decent responses. Um, but I think the challenge is to find, and especially when you're working with something like brand or narrative, is to go beyond that middle, because when you're trying to differentiate, by definition, you need to try and be different. And what you're often seeing kind of as responses from a lot of AI products is just like exactly the same as um as elsewhere. It's just kind of,
Yeah.
it's just very middling, and it can kind of, you sit down and look at it. It sounds great for like 2 minutes, and then you start looking at it properly. It's just like, well, this is just like, um, everyone else. Um,
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We see it with coding, right? Like, you can get good code out of the LLMs now, but actually, you need someone expert to look at it and go, yeah, that's right or wrong, or this is doing the right what you want it to do or not. Do you see yourself using it in a kind of an expert way as a brand strategist to go, well, actually, I can prompt it in the right way. I can see what's good that comes out of it, and actually, it can be instead of augmented sorry, no, instead of artificial intelligence, it becomes like an augmented imagination for you, and it drives you to do a better job. I think my business partner Rob loves to say that we are at the point at which AI is the worst it can be. It's going to get better from here, and
yeah,
so
exactly.
you
Yeah.
can use it in a much more dynamic way, and actually it makes experts even better, and makes your job or life easier. Do you see that, or is that not quite hitting the mark?
No, I do see that, and I think there are, if I mean, as with anything, and as with any tool, if you know how to use it well and properly, you can get some good things out of it. And I do use it, and I think it's sort of a useful. I guess it's, yeah, a useful kind of prod in certain ways. It's useful to kind of see a counterpoint, or to kind of, to, for coming up with or thinking about like different lines of inquiry that you might not have kind of covered and so on. But I think you kind of have to understand, its limitations, and you have to understand like what it's there for. And rather than seeing kind of as a total replacement, I think it's a very, very useful thing, alongside what it is that you're doing. And I think, and there's, the big debate at the moment is like whether it's going to wipe out every agency around. And I think I'm of the school of thought that, yes, a lot of agencies are going to be um, ruined by it, but it's the ones that are really good at certain things, or that are really distinctive, or provide a service, or provide like, a view, or, that just can't be replicated, at least for now. Um, but yeah, to go, to answer your question, I think it is useful, and I do kind of incorporate it into my workflow.
Yeah, I think it's an ever ongoing debate, right? And
Mm.
I think I I see a lot of people talking very positively about it and using it. Other people are like it's overhyped, and we shouldn't be too logged into it, or too kind of attached to it, because there's also potential bubble bursting at some point.
Yeah.
I see it on across various platforms, the difference of opinion about what we can do with it. We certainly use it a lot. We certainly kind of have kind of embraced it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where the next few years comes. And I guess your futurist background, do you see where do you see it kind of heading, and especially for your business and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think kind of the difficult thing is like kind of the existential risk of it. And I don't
Hmm.
mean sort of generalize AI, which is another thing, but it's just like, well, what does it mean if you're a person who writes, or comes
Yeah,
up with ideas and concepts, and how does one stay ahead, or how does one incorporate it? And um I think it's trying to, and as your business partner Rob says, it's only going to get better. It's only kind of going to improve. Um, and I think part of what I'm sort of trying to understand was, well, actually, how do you think about like kind of an outcome, um, that is entirely separate to like what AI gives you, and so an experience that is entirely different, separate. And for example, like one of the things I'm really interested in is kind of the idea of like the joy of an experience, and how do you incorporate joy into things, and um, the experience of AI right now is sort of, and it's primarily transactional, and obviously that's not entirely the case, and there are people who are kind of falling in love with their AI and so on. But as an experience, it's very kind of you know transactional. And I'm sort of much more interested in how do you kind of like inculcate joy into something, and that can cut across like lots of different aspects of like working with other people, or like coming up um, with a strategy, or a piece of writing, and I think that's those kinds of things um, are what's going to sort of um, make one stand out in whatever next era it is that we're entering. And the fact is, like, no one knows. Like, we're all kind of in the dark about things, and it's sort of, it reminds me a little bit of like kind of computing in the 1950s, and we're sort of like in the realms of like science fiction at the moment. We're saying it's going to do everything, but at the same time, and there are lots of people saying like it's a complete waste of time. It's only going to be like stuck in someone's room, and um, yeah, the fact is like no one knows, but it's trying to kind of see like kind of um, what AI kind of just doesn't provide, and how to work in other ways.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the bringing in joy into pieces. You know, I was actually I host an event, as you know, monthly, and it was last night, one of the events last night, and the energy and enjoyment that people get from going to the event, meeting people who are in a similar mindset, sharing ideas, sharing the energy in the room, like it really resonates with me. And it's better than just sitting in front of a computer all day, that's for sure. Do you bring that kind of idea into all of your kind of strategy sessions and brand sessions with your customers? Is that something which you're kind of pushing with them?
Yeah, very much so, and certainly sort of trying to see how to evolve that. But yeah, I mean that's really at the core of it, because it should be, it's building a brand should be fun, like building a narrative should be fun, and we're not. Um, we're not kind of doing heart surgery here. So like I sometimes kind of have to say to clients that actually almost like a as a check on them, like what we're doing is like is important, but in the scheme of things, we're not oncologists here, So this kind of thing like just should be fun. So as much as possible in terms of like, having conversations with clients, like this, or like what you're trying to achieve, and like the process of getting to a strategy or a narrative, like just should be like just simply joyful, and rather than something that's like trudging trudging through or wading through mud.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I've got two more questions for you. Two more questions for
Okay.
you. Okay, the first one is, um, what advice would you give if you were going back to speak to Evan back when he was doing classics? What advice would you give him, or advice to someone starting out their career now who's not quite sure about where to go, interested in various things? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And yeah, and a really good question. I think, um, and very often this is being in your 20s,
Mm,
and certain people start their career earlier, or they might start later, and I think there's a tremendous vertigo in being in your 20s, of like just seeing so many different things, and like your head spinning with like the possibilities and opportunity, right? um and I remember sort of reading this book years ago, kind of whose name escapes me, but that kind of talks about like kind of being in middle age, and the
mm,
fact that your options are so much more narrowed, and and one of the things the writer said was, well, actually, having so many options in when you're much younger, it's like it's just really really hard. And I remember sort of like in so many ways of drifting in my 20s in terms of like what am I going to do with my life, and that might still be sort of a remaining question, but I think the answer is like just don't take it too seriously. Just do something, because eventually, like the dots will connect. And I have a friend who has there's a company called the Dots Connect actually, but I think it's this idea of like, even if you are going off on a tangent, at some point, it'll come back in, or it'll lead somewhere. And so don't overthink it, and don't feel as though you have to find the thing or by the age of X, and that eventually, you'll come to know sort of what you enjoy, and like what you believe in and what you want to do. And like, I think for me, sort of the defining thread has actually been that sort of, I've always been kind of the words guy in the companies where I worked. And so sort of without realizing it, I just sort of became the words guy and said, running my own thing. So and without having kind of like, made that an intention. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bit of non-advice, but like, just don't overdo it.
No,
Just do something.
I concur with it completely. Like I was similar to you in my 20s, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, not really enjoying it, thinking I was making the wrong decisions. But in retrospect, it was like, well, I was trying something out, and I turned around and changed career and did something different. And I didn't need to worry that I was going down the wrong path, because you can change and you can do something different and still
Yeah.
use the experience you've had in the new thing you go to, because there are transferable skills across many things. Yeah, no, I agree with you. So good advice, Evan. Good advice.
Thank you.
Okay, left field question for you, and something I've asked before. If your business was a song or a band, who would they be, or what would it be?
So I'm going to tell you the first thing that came into my mind, and it might have been because I was listening to it about half an hour ago, or may not have been. But it's this group called Krangbin, which is unpronounceable and means something in Thai, apparently. But it's a trio. It's three people from Texas: a drummer, a bass player, and a guitar player. And they've done loads of just really, really lovely songs, tracks, and they just have the sound of summer in them. And there's just kind of something very very optimistic, quite fun, occasionally nostalgic, but just like, yeah, quite upbeat.
Amazing. I knew you'd come up with a left field one for the music one. I'm glad I asked. Evan, thank you so much for being on. It's been a super interesting conversation. How do people get in contact with you? What's the best place if people want to talk to you about brand strategy, positioning, all this kind of stuff? Where can people get in contact?
Yeah, so email me or the business at sort of Evan at studiojunction.io, or hello at studiojunction.io, or just look me up on LinkedIn, Evan Larbi.
Great. I shall put all that in the description. So,
Okay.
Evan, thank you so much again. Really interesting to have a conversation with you. And yeah, good luck.
Okay, thanks so much, Rob. That was it was really great to speak, and let's catch up soon.
Thanks for listening to the Old Street Labs podcast. We'd love to hear from you. So connect with us on LinkedIn or on our website at old.st.